So I'm going to quickly go over my suspension so I can put all the questions to rest that I keep getting asked. It's on the extreme side. I'm going to go over the pros and cons and future mods that I have planned to fix other issues and so forth. So I'm going to start at the rear. So I'll start with the lift side of it. So the first bit of lift is 5mm cradle drop. Then there's a 15mm Jeep spacer that's cut down to fit in there. 10mm Super Pro, raised king spring, 10mm Super Pro, and a 30mm Jeep spacer. Now to run the Jeep spacers you have to run the Super Pro spacers as well, and there's a tube that's welded inside to hold it so it can't pop out. Now that's the lift. It's a 90mm. By the time it comes out it ends up giving me about 100, so 4 inches, just over 4 inches of lift suspension wise. Now with lifting it this much you can't run standard shocks because that much extra will max out the travel and you'll actually be jacking the wheel up to try and get the bottom shock bolt in. So you have to run extended shocks. I use the Rancho Navarro ones and my sleeve kit. I've still got spacers down the bottom. I haven't put my actual spacer in yet, and that fixes that problem, and then I get a lot more travel out of that too. Next thing is when you lift it you actually end up with positive camber, so the top of the wheel leans out. So to fix that you got to go an adjustable arm. So I make my own, everyone knows, because I used to bend them. So I now strengthen them up and make my own Super Pro bushes in them, and that allows me on the car to adjust the wheels back to the right camber. Another support for this thing is my blade arms. So when you lift the car, if this makes sense, if I can put it like that, when you lift it the wheel comes forward because it's held by the blade arm. So what I've done is I've dropped my blade arm mount. You can see it up there. I smashed the studs out, put some longer bolts in, used a coupler, then welded some 6mm plate in, and then that's what I bolt mine up to. So it's dropped at about 45mm, and the idea of that is to drop that, it pushes the wheel back somewhat center of the wheel arch, and it pushes it back somewhat center, probably not as much as I want it, but that gets it back closer at the normal ride height it now sits at. Problem I have now is because I got so much flex in the rear because of the longer shocks, all the extra bits and pieces, the blade arms actually like to crack across here. I'll show you a blade arm, just go get it. So this is a cracked arm, you can see where it cracks. So that's why it's flexing up and down, but like that as well, it eventually cracks through. So my plan for these is there's a company called Fab House that make a new arm with like rose jointed hem joints, and I reckon I'd get better flex out of them because they'll flex the other way as well. So I'm thinking about giving them a go. If not, I'm just going to plate one of these an extra, like another chunk of 3mm steel, just to try and stop it snapping there. But you don't really want to rigid things up because then it's going to screw if you travel. It won't flex as easy, it won't travel as easy. Now another thing to get more travel is toe arms here. They, at full drop without the shock maxing out, they'll hit the cradle. So if you can see mine there, I've actually notched it out so that I can get full amount of travel. And then the other issue you have is with the cam bolt that adjusts it, the little tabs on the side will bend, so I've had to put weld either side of them to strengthen them up, front and back. It's a Super Pro arm. and Super Pro bump stops. Now the cradle itself, dropping at 5mm was pretty easy, and I haven't had any issues with the drive shaft or vibrations, so 5mm was pretty easy, and I only just got enough thread to get the nut back on without issues. Now I don't run a sway bar, and I don't even run the sway bar mounts anymore, so I cut out the original tire carrier mount as well because I don't need that. I got the one on the back. Now I cut out the sway bar mounts that go from there to there in the cradle. Reason for that is because you can see here, that's the CV boot. Every time I was in the mud would build up on top of there, and that's what always, as you can see this one is, always ripped my boots open. So I was lucky to get 2 or 3 trips in the mud before the boots would rip, solely because the mud would build up on top of it. So I've cut them out, both sides, and now nothing can rub on my CV boots. So that's my reasoning behind that. Now I'm pretty happy with my rear suspension setup, except for those blade arms, like I said. But on my next one, I do plan to modify the cradle some more on my other project. I'm going to drop it about 30mm, and I'm also going to modify the diff the way it sits and drop it another 10mm. Reason for that is to try and bring my CVs back straighter, because at full drop at the moment they're right on their maximum. As I say, Falcon CVs actually are too short and they fall out at full drop. So I've pretty much got as much travel as I can get without now dropping it. So I'm not going to lose clearance because I'm going to run a bigger tire, so that'll make up for the drop. I'll end up with the same amount of clearance as this. But I'd also like to look at getting custom arms made that come out flat and then lower down to the mount, so that way I don't have to run all the spaces and I get a heap more extra clearance here. So that's mods that I'm going to do on the other car. This one, as I said, I'm happy with now, so we'll move on to the front. Just one more thing quickly before I put the wheel back on. So this is the spacer that I run down the bottom of the shock. This one currently just has washers, but I will replace that with this. So it's a bit more cleaner looking, I suppose. And the reason you got to space it out is, like you'll see, like it's done here already, it'll actually bang and damage the shock. So these shocks are about had it already, because the bolt keeps falling off, and now that's why I use Loctite on it now. And when we're talking about lift things, I've evolved from the Jeep spacers. Like, I won't be using them anymore because now I've got my bolt-in spacer that bolts in up here, and it drops at 40mm straight up. So by the time I modify the arms on the new one and run these, I won't need any other spacers, and I'll see what king springs or standard height or standard springs or what works once I get that all together. Again, I'll start with what actual lift we have. So we got 60mm bolt-on spacer, you got Super Pro top hat. These are actually SZ diesel springs. So diesel springs are actually a little bit stiffer because the diesels actually weigh a little bit more, so their spring rate's a little bit different. They give a small bit of lift, still not as stiff as king springs, but that's them, and they're on the second design of shock. Then I've also got an SZ fork down the bottom, so that gives about 25. Spring would give 5 or 10, then you got 60 up there. Same as the back, it ends up about 4 inches, just over 4 inches of lift. Now with that, I used to have K-Mac upper mounts, but I snapped one and I looked at all the others and they weren't far off snapping either, so I've changed them and I went to use a standard mount. So the standard mounts actually come all the way up here, but the problem was, you can see there, see where the head is, they end up here, so you can't actually physically get them on. because the arm's normally up here. So I had to flip them, so I've flipped them upside down, I've trimmed them off, and I've re-drilled where the hole goes. I've re-drilled it back as far as I possibly could. I removed the shims off the back, the weld, like spot welded on ones, and when it's sitting at ride height, the problem I still have is I've got positive camber, so the top of the wheel's leaning out, and I need to get it in more, but I can't. The only way around this is going to be an adjustable arm. So there is a company that make them, and that's something I'm gonna have to look at in the future, so I can still fix my front camber issues, because at the moment running a little bit of positive camber, and it is actually slowly, that's the inside, this is the outside, slowly wearing the outside of the tire more, and I can't do anything to fix it because the arms are maxed where they are. Now again, I don't run a front sway bar. Not running sway bars makes the car handle a lot different on road. I've gotten used to it, but you definitely can't corner like you would, and it's not as sticky to the ground, I guess you'd say, without them. Like, you get that body roll, but the wider tires, all that, it doesn't really affect too much of the way I drive, so I don't miss them. Off-road, not having sway bars makes such a massive difference. I couldn't even, until you've given it a go, you just won't understand it, I don't think. I've got a lot more travel in the front now because of not running them, and because of flipping and lowering them, that ball joint doesn't max out, so now it allows this wheel to drop even more. You can actually see here where the front arm is actually bent down the cradle a little, because it hits as well at full drop with the weight of the wheel. Now this is an easy one, I'll just notch it out. Front CVs, they do like to click and carry on now, so with all this travel, when it's at full drop like this with the wheel on, I'll show you a clip, the front CVs love to click. You wouldn't want to push them any further, in my honest opinion. Again, my way of thinking to fix that, you'd have to lower the cradle. So lowering the cradle will fix a little bit of your CV angle, but for now this works. Another downside is the shock ends up really close to the chassis, and I get the odd clonk from it. Now also not running a sway bar, and we're changing the arm because it travels so much easier up and down. Over sharp bumps, I will bottom out the shock, like it'll compress that much that it'll bottom out. I don't know if it currently have bump stops in there, I've got to put some back in there because of that, but I'm currently looking at running, maybe trying to make some adapters for the bottom to bolt to the fork and run Pajero shocks or something along those lines, something that's still got a nice soft, even could go a progressive spring or something like that. So that's another future mod for the front. Now another big issue, if you can't see it right there, is the steering rod angle. Like, that's extreme, so you can imagine when you're going along, I hit a bump that comes up, also pushes the wheel out, so I get a lot of bumps there. So I've actually come up with a solution, which I've still got to muck around a little bit with. This is an RTV Falcon, what's this one, tie rod. Then I got a universal tie rod end with a hem joint. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it to the top side of the knuckle instead, so I can try and bring that back a bit more level and not get as much bumps there. So that's a future mod for the front, along with changing the shocks and along with changing the upper arms. So it's all this sort of stuff I try and explain to people. Like, it's all well and good to have it, but every time you change something, you need to change something else, and it just snowballs out of control. So the higher you go, the harder it is, and the more you got to think and custom do stuff. Like, I'm lucky I can build most of this myself. If you couldn't, it'd be very expensive, and it'd be very hard to find someone who wants to do it. No one wants to do this sort of stuff to a Territory because they all think it's not made for it, which it isn't, I suppose. The front diff's new. It's got Poly Pro bushes. SY2 obviously. It's got the SY2 upgrade. I have replaced this radius arm. So the ball joint did go in it, and I've had to replace that. I got probably 3 years out of it, which I'm not too upset about for the way it's treated and abused, and the actual kilometers the car does clock up on road is still quite a lot as well. I don't really know what else at the front. You can see there my boot, my CV boot rubs. So I'm probably going to have to do some trimming and reinforcement on that too. So every time you look at the car, you always see something else that needs work. All my brakes have been upgraded, as everyone knows. Hang on. No. Yeah. That's Buddy. New addition. Yeah. So that sums up the front. Like, it is expensive. It doesn't look like it, and it's not perfect. So driving this thing around on the road, it is a bit of a pig. Like, it's not like a road car anymore. Yeah, it has its clinks, clonks, bangs. Like, the diffs are still stock, open, so nothing's been done to the diffs or the transfer case. So for what it is, like, everyone's seen where it goes. It does quite well, and it just goes to show that with some mods and sticking to it, they are capable. So like, my next thing too with the new one is I'm going to put a locker in the rear. I'm going to run the 6-speed for better gearing, and I'm going to put, yeah, locker rear, and I'm going to put the 410 diff gears in, so from one of these, the 4-speed models. Same with the front. I'm going to machine down LSD from M78 to fit the M70. I know there's a lot of people interested in that one because there's just nothing available for the fronts. And after talking to another guy recently, I'm even thinking about having to go welding up a transfer case just to see what it does, see how it handles. I don't think it'll handle very good, but never know. I think once you start doing that, if you've got a locked diff, lower gearing, LSD front, locked center, like with the travel the suspension's got for an IRS car, like independent suspension car, it's going to go quite well. But yeah, that'll sum this video up. So that's the pros and cons. Like I say, it's a lot of work, and then I've got to constantly pull things apart, re-grease it, check bushes, check bolts are tight, yeah, replace arms that are bent and broken. There's a lot to it, and the car gets hammered off-road. Yeah, it gets abused, so it's not looked after in that sense. It's maintenance wise, it's looked after quite well. I have to, or else it'll keep falling apart like it has been lately. Yeah, if you've got any other questions or queries, just ask me. I'm not a complete expert on the suspension, but I've been making it up as I go, and it's working out. Sum up the lift again, like the suspension front and back, so suspension lift is about 4 inches, just over 4 inches. Now these are 265 17 tires, and of course they're on the 17/8 negative 25 offset, so that's why they stick out so far. Downside to these rims is I'm always doing wheel bearings because of it. So that's another thing. I've always got a stock of spare hubs sitting in the shed, because it's easier just to keep replacing with old used hubs rather than get the bearings pressed on and pressed off. I haven't done the front ones. I've never done a front bearing yet, only done the rears. Now, as I said, tyres are 265 17, so they are actually their sidewall, so from there to there, which is ground clearance lift from factory, it's got an extra 44 mil, so there's nearly another 2 inches of lift. So that's why I say all up I'm running around 6 inches of actual extra clearance to a standard one. So a standard one will be down here roughly, Now I'm like 150 mil higher. Now I know some people claim some stupid lifts, and I'd like one of their magical tape measures, but that is what you actually get out of it. So that's probably a 6-inch lifted Territory.